Welcome to Cool Tunes for a Hot Planet, the podcast where music inspires action for social and climate justice.
Hi and welcome to Cool Tunes for a Hot Planet, episode 34, season 2. I'm your host, Warren Senders. This episode is a special celebration of the Lunar New Year with moon-themed music from all over the world and an interview with best-selling science writer Rebecca Boyle, author of Our Moon. But before we begin, please take a minute to click like and subscribe so we can keep on bringing you inspiring music and environmental awareness all year round. Are you ready? Buckle up and let's get started with a few words of introduction from the one and only Eddie Jefferson.
Come along with me into mystery. We will all explore the moon and we won't come back if our fuel goes out. We'll go sailing right into space. Let's make haste. Don't hesitate, we're gonna be the first to get there. Everybody's talking, countries are squawking about their latest rockets. You come and go with me, we will be the first to see what there is to see. I bet there's nothing there but an awful lot of space and air. But we'll soon know because we're taking off and going to the moon. Counting down, 10, 9, 7, 6, 5, 4, here we go.
With me today is Rebecca Boyle. Rebecca is a Colorado-based journalist and science reporter. She's a contributing editor at Scientific American, and she's written for Quanta magazine and The Atlantic, as well as the New York Times, Smithsonian, Popular Science, and many other publications. Her book, Our Moon: How Earth's Celestial Companion Transformed the Planet, Guided Evolution, and Made Us Who We Are, came out on Random House in 2024. It's a national bestseller, and I was delighted that she agreed for this interview. Rebecca, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
The Teddy Wilson Sextet and their version of the great old standard, How High the Moon. How'd you get to be a person who writes a book about the moon?
I think I've always had a fascination with the moon. Ever since I was a kid, it was my favorite thing in the sky. And then now, as somebody who writes about astronomy and astrophysics, it's a lot of astronomers' least favorite thing because it's so bright. It's like in the way. If you're going to do, modern astronomy is cosmology and astrophysics. And so you have to do your observations when the moon is not up, or when it's it's early in its phases or later in its phases, so you can actually have a dark sky. The moon matters, and the moon's important to Earth, and in planetary science, it sort of tells the story of Earth's history and the fact that there are so many open questions about the moon's origin and its nature, I find super, super interesting, just because it's such a fundamental part of Earth and who we are.
I asked Rebecca to tell me more about the current scientific consensus on how the moon was formed. It's an amazing story that makes me wish I could go back in time and watch, from a safe distance, of course. The music for this segment is a piece called New Moon by Tony Vaca and Tim Moran.
Since Apollo, at least, we have thought that the moon formed from a giant impact of some kind on the Earth, that it sort of was shorn away, that it is a piece of Earth, or a piece of the impactor. That's been the broader kind of theory for a long time. Before Apollo, we really had no idea why the moon was here and how it got here. And there were some really fun theories about, how it could have arrived. My favorite theory came from Howard Darwin, Charles's son,
Mm-hmm.
who was a physicist, and his theory was that Earth was spinning so quickly that it like flung off part of itself. And this was also interpreted to mean that that was why the Pacific Ocean is so deep. Because it's
Ah,
like
because
this
the moon
scar,
used to be there.
because the moon should have been there. And so Earth like sort of kind of re-slumped around itself to fill this gap. But now we know now that that's not exactly what happened. And in part because of Apollo, like the moon rocks really told this story of how the moon itself would have been catastrophically heated, and the time in which that would have happened and the like completeness with which it would have happened told this story of a really traumatic event. And for a long time we sort of thought like something hit Earth. It came into our orbit around the sun and collided with Earth. So this impactor was named Theia, which is the mother of Selene, the
Okay.
goddess of the moon in Greek mythology. So the moon was thought to be the like remains of this impactor. But in the last 20 or so years, there's been these updated studies of the Apollo samples. So the newer version of this theory is that this was a horrible event. It was so energetic, it was so catastrophic that both the impactor and the Earth, Earth 1.0, were both totally obliterated. And somehow in this, superheated cloud of molten rock and vapor, two things coalesced and formed two new
Wow.
worlds, which are Earth and the moon as we have it now. And, the particulars of that are still really debated, and not everybody agrees that this formation process is what took place. So hopefully we will get some more clarity in the next few
Mm-hmm.
years on this process. But even then, there's nothing for us to compare it to. There is no other system like this
Right.
anywhere that we've ever found in this solar system or any other, which I think is also really compelling. That says something about the uniqueness of this planet and our situation.
If you're anything like me, you probably have a vague sort of intuition that the moon plays an important role in Earth's seasons and climate, but you're kind of fuzzy on the details. We'll let Woody Herman and his orchestra set it up with their version of "'Tis Autumn."
We have seasons because we have the moon.
Right.
We have seasons because the way the Earth's axis tilts, which is because the moon keeps it that way.
Old Father Time checked so there'd be no doubt. Called down the north wind to come on out. Then cupped his hands so proudly to shout. La-dee-da, la-da-dee-dee, 'tis autumn.
If we didn't have the moon and it didn't have its heft in terms of its, mass and its distance to Earth, and therefore its gravitational influence over Earth, then Earth would spin differently over time. So the rotation of Earth would be different. It's slowing down right now because the moon is receding from us. And there's this exchange of angular momentum between both worlds that means the Earth is slowing down as it spins and the moon's receding.
Then the birds got together to chirp about the weather. After making their decision, and birdie-like precision, turned the bow and made a beeline to the south.
And also, the moon sort of keeps Earth's axis from going like a spinning top, kind of wobbling very erratically, which other planets do. Mars, we know, wobbles pretty erratically on its axis. And if that happened on Earth, over these time scales, like imagine like Greenland and the, polar ice cap sort of pointed toward where Earth's equator is now. So you'd get a lot more solar radiance throughout the year, and then ice wouldn't be able to live very long, and Earth's ocean circulation patterns would shift dramatically, like they're beginning to because of us. But the moon doesn't allow this. The moon keeps it sort of more stable over time. and allows Earth's axis to wobble a little bit. It does. It's called precession of the equinoxes. This does happen, but it's way less dramatic than it would be if we didn't have the moon.
It's a kind of governor.
Yeah, the moon is, yeah, it's, I think I thought about it as like a protector, like if we didn't have the moon keeping us stable, then Jupiter's gravity would like knock us around, like a mean kid on a playground or something. Like you kind of bump into you and knock you over and you're like, catch your feet. But the moon is there, kind of safeguarding Earth's passage through the solar system. And if we didn't have it, our climate would be way more variable over millennia than it has been.
And we probably wouldn't be here.
I would think that's the case, yeah. I would argue that. We probably wouldn't be here.
My holding you close really is no crime. Ask the birds, the trees, and old Father Time. It's just to help the mercury climb. La-di-da, la-da-di-dee, 'tis autumn.
A lot of the pieces we're using for our background music in this episode come from the songwriters of the American popular tradition of the early 20th century, the so-called Great American Songbook. Here's Moonrise on the Lowlands, performed by the Fletcher Henderson Orchestra. Most of us know the songs of the great masters, composers like Irving Berlin, Rodgers and Hart, Cole Porter, Jerome Kern, Harold Arlen, and the Gershwin brothers. But during the first decades of the 20th century, hundreds of songwriters put in 14-hour days in tiny, smoky rooms, grinding out song after song in the hope of just possibly scoring the next big hit. There's a terrific YouTube channel called Sheet Music Singer, which unearths and performs the published versions of songs which mostly had faded into obscurity a few weeks after they were written. I did a simple search through all their postings on the word moon, and the listing went on and on and on and on and on. Eventually, the songwriters themselves began to notice that certain words and rhymes were showing up all the time. From there, it was just a simple step to meta-songwriting, like the totally recursive item blah blah blah, which George and Ira Gershwin originally planned for an aborted musical called East is West. They eventually used it in a movie called Delicious. Here's a brief excerpt from Matthew Cook's rendition.
I studied all the rhymes that all the lovers sing, and just for you I wrote this little thing. Blah, 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 moon, blah, 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 above, blah, 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 croon, blah, 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 love.
I don't know why the great boogie-woogie pianist Meade Lux Lewis called one of his specialties the tidal boogie, but the surface noise on this old 78 RPM disc sounds almost like ocean waves. I asked Rebecca about the moon and the tides, and she told me this amazing story from World War II.
So there's one island, it's a coral atoll called Tarawa, and it had a thick airstrip. So it's very strategic for us and for the Japanese. So they plan an invasion to capture this coral atoll. And they know they needed a high tide to float their flat-bottom boats over the barrier reef. They didn't have tide charts from this region. Nobody did. This was before satellites. This is before really the age of aerial mapping. And so they were using tide charts from literally Captain Cook from like the age of sail in the 1800s. And they miscalculated. And it turned out that the high tide did not come in as expected. It was too shallow, And so the boats got stuck on this barrier reef. It's the deadliest battle in the history of the Marine Corps, even up to today. And eventually, after 3 days, the Allies did capture the island, and lots of casualties. And I don't think anybody really knew why until 2010 or so. A physicist did some calculating and understood that the moon was further away in its orbit at its most distant point of the month. So it's the opposite of a supermoon, basically, where its influence is weaker because it's just further away. And so its tide is less powerful. So the dodging tide, as they called it. There's a lot of research in the last few years, especially, that look at the influence of lunar tides on evolution. There's a lot of fossil evidence that's been coming out in the last few years that shows land-based backboned animals come out of the water at a certain era of time. It only happens one time. And, they go back to re-evolve into animals that live in the sea. But for one instance in Earth history, animals leave the water to come onto land. And at that time, when this happened, the moon was exerting a really powerful influence over the tide because Earth's geography was changing. So the shoreline was really dramatic in most of the locations on Earth where these animals were coming out of the water. So there probably is a really deep connection to the moon and life on Earth from the very beginning up until now.
We've been lucky to have a dedicated intern, Janelle Chang, who's been helping us keep Cool Tunes for a Hot Planet up to date, thereby preserving what remains of our sanity. But more importantly, Janelle is a gifted composer. We've featured one of her pieces in an earlier episode, and when I learned about her arrangement of Moonlit Night, a 300-year-old piece of Chinese classical music, I asked her to come on and tell us about it.
It's an ancient piece. Probably about 300 years ago, it was composed. Then the title of it, the piece can be translated into like How High the Moon, or Moonlit Night. Yeah, it's a solo pipa piece and representing the lyrical idea, like very introspective, beautiful, very meditative sort of scholarly atmosphere. So pipa is a perfect instrument for delivering such an idea.
Tell us the name of the performer, please.
So she is Bang Yi, also a current student at the New England Conservatory. So moon is actually a very vivid image in lots of our literature, Chinese literature. For instance, the full moon symbolizes family unity and completeness. But when the moon is not in a very complete shape, that also represents like longing and separation. this piece of music has some particular image that describe about the performance, such as icy disc rising over the sea, or gazing at the moon from a riverside pavilion or something, like hesitation at the sea cliffs or moonlit dew filling the sky. So there are many images that related to the moon. So that's also described in this piece of music.
Janelle Chang, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your music with us.
Yeah, my very pleasure. Thank you, Warren.
In this segment, Rebecca and I listened to some different pieces of moon-themed music together.
My favorite, probably piece of composed music, maybe ever, is Clair de Lune. Mm-hmm. And I listened to that a lot writing this. It sort of blossoms like the moon does, that piece. It starts out slowly, and it almost phases. It sort of repeats, and the themes come back, and it soars at the end, and it's like a full moon is where you're left.
One of the pieces we included in our Old and New Sunlight episode in September 2025 was a Schubert Lieder for the Setting Sun. So I knew I wanted to share a Schubert song to the moon in this episode. Here's his setting of Ludwig Christoph Heinrich Holty's poem An den Mond, To the Moon, as performed by mezzo-soprano Courtney Fletcher.
I mean, that's so evocative of, the thing that came to mind is this German painter, Caspar David Friedrich. And he has all these romantic paintings, and there's always mist in the Caspar David Friedrich paintings. But the moon is a really frequent motif of his. And I went to see some of his paintings when I was in Germany writing this book. And I imagined one of those paintings while listening to that.
Next up is Moonlight Play Song from Nigeria, which, according to the researcher who recorded it in 1975, is the prelude for a co-ed game of hide-and-seek. After that, we'll hear two more songs about the moonlit night and the feelings it brings. First, from the Hindustani singer Sharad Sathe, and then from the incomparable Little Richard.
Nyadaro nyoke, nyadaro nyonyi, ebo nyoke, ebo nyonyi, ebo nyoke, ebo nyonyi, nyadaro nyoke, nyadaro nyonyi.
Listening to that, I was thinking about just the call and response, and also how that is a lunar relationship. I feel like there's this give and take. It doesn't just sit there passively, and neither do we. There's an interaction happening, and what they were singing sounded like that to me. It was like Marco Polo,
The constant transfer of energy back and forth.
Exactly, yeah.
Lovely.
There's an exchange of angular momentum. That sounds to my ear almost plaintive. Like he's more, there's more longing in that note. That feels like, yeah, yearning, but like not in a sort of, Christian way. Like it feels a little more sensual, I guess, or a little more
Perfect.
like sad, maybe.
By the light of the silvery moon, I want a spoon to my honey I croon. Love to know honeymoon. Keep it shining in June. Your silvery beam will bring love dreams. We'll be calling soon. By the light of the moon. Whoa, by the light.
I mean, it's such a common motif in like romance songs and poetry that like at some point I kind of gave up in the book, even being like trying to picture a couple or give a couple examples, because it's just so prevalent as a motif. And yeah, even like in old rock and roll,
Yep.
the oldest rock and roll or R&B,
By the light of the
Everywhere around the world, people have organized their lives around the moon's passage through the sky, and humans' attempts to make sense of it form the foundation for all the disciplines of observation and calculation.
So the solar year is, 365.25 days, which is why we have leap years. And the lunar year is about 354 solar days. So if you only use the moon to count your time and, initiate a new year at the end of the last moon of a solar year, you're going to be out of step with the solar year by a lot, only in a couple of years. And this is the case for like the Islamic calendar, the Jewish calendar, and some calendars in Asia. There's some resets that they use, but this is why you could have Ramadan in the middle of summer sometimes. And I always feel bad for my Muslim friends when it's in July, because like the fast is so much longer.
Right.
when the day is long. And why it can be sometimes in the fall, that moves around because you're using the moon only to mark that time passage. But every culture on Earth, on every continent, figured out a way to sort of marry these systems and make them work together. It's hard to do, and you can do it in lots of different ways. People figured this out a long time ago, and it mattered because if you're using the moon to say, oh, in the third moon of the year, that's when we have this fish migration that we have to check to be able to feed our people. Or in the sixth moon of the year, is when the weddings happen or whatever, any number of things humans would have used to mark their year. But if you have, say, your harvest festival is in the eighth moon of the year, and in a couple of years, the eighth moon comes, a lot earlier, well, you're just barely planting your crops. You can't have a harvest festival yet because they're not grown. And like, what are you going to do? So you have to figure out how to reset the calendar. And it's, about 12 days, which even the 12 days of Christmas is a holdover from this misalignment. And people have used different strategies. Like they insert a 12-day extra time. The 12 days of Christmas, tradition is like added on to help the lunar year catch up to the solar year. Or you have every 4 years or so, you just like start over. And there are all these artifacts and, again, places that humans have used to be able to track these relationships and make the moon work for us. And every culture and every continent for all of time, people have used the solstices to kind of like reset the year, often in the winter solstice in the northern hemisphere. That's like a time of, deep privation and lack in terms of availability of food and things like that, and the need for shelter, but also a time to sort of like reset and plan. The moon does the same thing every 18 years. And so ancient people figured this out, 10,000 years ago in various places. And in this one area of Scotland, they also built monuments that signified this event. It's a specific design of these megalith monuments like Stonehenge. And they're all aligned to face, a rising or setting moon. And they're all thought to represent this 18 and a half year lunar cycle. And so the interpretation is that they would have had some sort of ceremony there or festival or cultural, event of some meaning. But these places are still very powerfully connected to nature and the sort of cycles of the sun and the moon even now. And they're often, ringed by like hiking trails, or they have little maps that explain the individual arrangements of stones. There's often rock art carved into them left by the Picts and the Celts. We're still using them. Like, I went to them and I'm trying to think about what they mean, and I'm interpreting them in my way and through my lens. And so I don't even really view them as ancient relics. I view them as continuous, connections that people developed to the moon in, our distant past, but that are still meaningful to us.
This is a performance by Zia Mohyuddin Dagar of the raga called Chandrakons on an ancient stringed instrument called the Rudravina. In Sanskrit and Hindi, the word for moon is Chandra, and Kons is a family of scales, so this is a scale dedicated to the moon.
In Colorado, where I live, there are, several ancient cities that are no longer in use in the same way by the Puebloan people who built them. And I thought a lot about the people who lived there and what their lives would have been like. And the notion that, this 18.6 year lunar standstill cycle to people back then would have represented like 2 of those as like late middle age, like you're not going to live much longer than that. And yet they waited for this. In this one area of Colorado called Chimney Rock, there's an ancestral Puebloan village, and they built a great house, and it was built because the moon at this time of year, the lunar standstill, every 18 and a half years, rises precisely between these sandstone columns that are formed naturally by erosion. But they've built their house to face this so that they would see this perfect alignment of the moon between these sandstone pillars. So it must have had some real meaning to them to be able to keep track of that over long enough time, over just a couple of these, and a person is entering old age. But yet they did, and they built an entire city in this place. Right. So it must have really mattered, and it must have mattered for a long time, and they must have put a lot of attention and thought into doing something like that. So I feel like that's a testament to its power.
Do we think about the moon differently now that we've been there?
I think so. And I think in some ways it's sad because, Apollo happened before I was born. My parents were young. And so I might have a less common perspective on that than other people, where to me, I'm like almost offended by that. Not like the moon was somehow defiled, which some people do feel that way. That's a strong belief, and again, in the Navajo people.
Mm.
But it's more like there's more to it than that. It's not important just because some dudes walked on it once a half century ago. Like the moon is so fundamentally connected to us all, and everybody should have access to that connection. And it shouldn't be different now just because some Americans put a flag there.
Mm-hmm.
And I say that and as a person who loves Apollo, and like I have a
Right.
signed picture of Neil Armstrong behind me that my dad obtained for me when I was a kid. I love Apollo. I will never not be awed by it, but I think that the moon offers us a lot more than the vision of it that we have had since Apollo.
Mm-hmm.
And my hope with this book was to sort of go back to that and to show people that we might have had a new vision of it now since we've walked on it, but I think that vision is a little bit more nearsighted than it should be.
Hafiz Shasha Otman Effendi recorded this exquisite piece of Turkish lyric poetry just about 100 years ago. Oh, dear moon, are you out to gaze at him tonight?
We had so many epigraphs in this book too that we ended up cutting. One of them is a poem by Rumi, who's the Sufi poet.
Yes.
And I'll just read this. It says, "A new moon teaches gradualness and deliberation, and how one gives birth to oneself slowly.
Ooh.
Patience with small details makes perfect a large work, like the universe. What 9 months of attention does for an embryo, 40 early mornings will do for your gradually growing wholeness."
Wow. Are there things people know for sure that just ain't so?
Yeah, the idea that like planets all have moons, or that like it makes sense that a planet would have a satellite. I think people don't think about it being a strange thing, even though we didn't know that was even possible until Galileo, until he showed us the moons of Jupiter through a telescope. But I think even still, people sort of take that for granted, and it actually is very rare for a planet to have a satellite like our moon. Even the
Right.
satellite, even the Galilean satellites, and the satellites of Saturn and Neptune and Uranus are really numerous, but they're all really small compared to their planets, and they're mostly just like little crumbs that got left over from
Right.
the planet's formation. There's nothing else like this system anywhere. And I think people are like, wait, what? But don't they all have a moon? And it's like, no. And I mean, the moon landing is real.
Right.
I do get asked about that fairly often, and it's like I've seen the moon rocks. They are real. People did go, and it's a shame that we haven't been back yet, but hopefully that will happen soon.
While we're on the subject of moon-related ignorance, I just had to share this priceless clip of Representative Louis Gohmert from Texas, known justifiably for years as the dumbest member of Congress.
On the issue of climate change, I was informed by the immediate past director of NASA that they have found that the moon's orbit is changing slightly, and so is the Earth's orbit around the sun. And so, is there anything that the National Forest Service or BLM can do to change the course of the moon's orbit or the Earth's orbit around the sun? Obviously, that would have profound effects on our climate.
I would have to follow up with you on that one, Mr. Gomert.
Yeah. Well, if you figure out a way that you in the Forest Service can make that change, I'd like to know.
The Rising of the Moon is an Irish ballad describing a crucial battle of the Irish Rebellion of 1798. The great folk musician Sean Tyrrell sang it throughout his career, often with his daughter Anya. She recorded an updated version with beautiful lyrics by Padraig Stevens and Siobhan O'Higgins, and graciously gave us permission to share the last verse with you.
We can live within God's garden if we tender with our care. We can understand the meanings, the motives of the fair. Though we stumble through the darkness, trying far too much too soon, let's all stand up and be counted at the rising of the moon. At the rising of the moon, at the rising of the moon. It's a truth that guides us onwards at the rising of the moon. At the rising of the moon, at the rising of the moon. At the rising of the moon, at the rising.
Is there anything that you really want people to know?
I think I would want people to know that I believe the moon still influences humans in profound ways that we don't understand. And this is beginning to be, to come back around in medical literature, that there are really strong signs that the moon plays a role in the onset of things like aneurysm or stroke, even in like childbirth, labor begins in certain cycles of the moon. Human like reproductive cycles follow lunar cycles pretty closely across cultures, which I think is really compelling. And, I'm not going to say that like it's because of the moon that, human ovulation is the same like period of time as a lunar cycle, but I think it's surely a strange coincidence if it isn't related. And the fact that that's the case for other great apes too, I think is very compelling. So I think we should just be more aware of those relationships as we try to find, hopefully, seek ways to, stay connected to nature, that the moon is part of that too, and it is a part of who we are.
Beautifully spoken. And I just couldn't end this episode without sharing one of my favorite doo-wop songs, There's a Moon Out Tonight by the Capris from 1959.
There's a moon out tonight. Let's go strolling. There's a girl in my heart whose heart I've stolen. There's a moon out tonight. Let's go strolling through the park.
Rebecca Boyle, thank you so much for taking the time out to share your knowledge and all of your experience. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. This was fun. I like having the music part of it. That's definitely unique. So I appreciate that.
There's a glow in my heart I never felt before.
And that's it for this special episode celebrating the Lunar New Year. I'd like to thank Rebecca Boyle and Janelle Chang for sharing their time and insights. My full interview with Rebecca will be available on the Cool Tunes YouTube channel. You can find out more about her and her work at RebeccaBoyle.com. Please like and subscribe and tell your friends about Cool Tunes for a Hot Planet so we can keep bringing music and environmental activism to you all year round. For the credits, here's singer Patricia Hammond with A Message from the Man in the Moon. I'm Warren Senders. Thank you for listening.
And found me alone and blue. The man in the moon told me from the man in the moon for you. Just you.
Just you.
He said to tell you there's a bench in the park for two. Just two. I know you should be sleeping, and I'm keeping you awake. But I'm just delivering a message he told me to take. I got a message saying we will be round to call. And then, if we don't meet him, he may never be round to call again. The evening found me lonely, and I thought you might be lonely too. So I brought a message from the man in the moon for you.